Alrighty, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the second webinar in our National Tribal Energy Roundtable series. Today we'll be focusing on clean energy, higher education, and workforce development with our moderators from Shasta Advisors, President Daniel Cardenas and CJ Stewart, Energy and Water Resource Director with the Crow Tribe. So before we start, just a few words about our program. I'm Michelle Littlefield. I'm a program coordinator with USEA Consensus Program. This is a cooperative agreement with the Department of Energy, Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. So this program seeks to educate the public, policymakers, industry, and stakeholders on CCUS and carbon management technologies, including tribal energy, by hosting webinars along with a series of monthly educational briefings, conference workshops, technical reports, and we release a bi-monthly news clips of CCUS and carbon management related updates, including rare earth elements and critical minerals, blue hydrogen, and environmental justice as it relates to carbon management. So if you'd like to subscribe, feel free to send an email to the address at the bottom of your screen. And just a little housekeeping, feel free to use the raise your hand button or the Q&A button after presentations to ask questions. We'll be answering Q&A after the presentations. This webinar will also be recorded and posted on our webpage, but we do appreciate you taking the time to join us live. With that, I'll pass it on to Daniel Cardenas, President of Shasta.
Thank you, Michelle. Again, my name is Daniel Cardenas. My partner, Conrad Stewart, CJ, he's having some technical issues, so hopefully he'll be on soon. But in the meantime, we can get started with our presentation. I just wanted to thank everybody again, those that are tuning in live and those that will be listening and watching once it's recorded. Once it's recorded, we'll also, everybody will have a link to watch the webinar at their convenience. So I wanted to thank everybody in advance for their attendance and their support, but also any questions that you may or may not have. We also would like, if you want, like Michelle said, to raise your hand and ask a question, write in your question, you can, or if you would like to do that offline, you also have that choice as well. If you have something that you thought about and wasn't able to answer or ask prior, you can also do that. So with that, I just wanted to introduce the speakers that we have on board today, Mr. Jeremy Friesen and Clifton Cross. And Jeremy, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the invitation. Jeremy Friesen, president of Canada America, which is the US arm of Canada Clean Power and Climate Technologies. And background is mostly in energy. Worked many years in New York for Morgan Stanley, and in Hong Kong for Societe Generale and RBC, in Toronto, all kind of focused in the energy space. Been working in clean energy development, specifically around First Nations and tribes since 2016, and Canada itself works with guys who've been working really in that core zero carbon energy development with First Nations since 2014, and it's a pleasure to join you all.
Hello, everyone. My name is Clifton Cross. I'm from Frog Lake First Nations out here in Alberta, Canada. Pleasure to be on the call with you. I'm a council member with Frog Lake for the last 4 years, my second term. I was born, raised, graduated, and raised a family in Frog Lake First Nations. Greetings from the Treaty 6 territories. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and like we said, CJ hopefully will arrive soon, and then once the speakers are done, he can introduce himself properly, and then he'll be able to participate. So hopefully that'll happen soon. Jeremy, if you'd like to start your presentation.
Thanks. Let me try to share my screen. Am I able to, do you see my screen yet? Here,
There we go. We're good.
Perfect. So again, I wanted to thank CJ and Daniel for inviting us and the USEA for helping co-sponsor this event with the Department of Energy. This is a once in a generation, if not more, opportunity, we believe, for First Nations and tribes with the energy transition. The energy transition has a lot of complexity to it, but I think the areas are well suited to a lot of the resource First Nations and tribes. There is a great opportunity to take advantage of the hydrocarbon resources that these nations have been blessed with, and along with that, the geology that allows for deep saline aquifer sequestration and enhanced oil recovery. So you have the ability to be able to better extract in a clean, sustainable way resources, energy, valuable, important energy, and take the services of decarbonization and add that as another service that can be done onto the First Nations land. And I think the important part of this, having this roundtable, is to try to figure out how we can work together with local, state, federal, and tribal and First Nation sovereign entities to really bridge the information and the opportunity gaps that will help these nations fully develop their resources to the benefit not only to these communities, but also to the nation as far as energy security and better economic development. So Canada America is, as I mentioned earlier, just in my introduction, it's the U.S. arm of Canada Clean Power and Climate Technologies based out of Canada. My experience has been in the U.S. working in energy and specifically around clean energy for the last 6 or 7 years. We're focused on as a co-founded, First Nations co-founded, First Nations invested, and First Nations committed company to the energy transition, specifically around hydrocarbons, around taking advantage of the resources that a lot of nations have, but doing it in a sustainable way and doing a way that is fully committed to the energy transition. And as I mentioned, I think there's a great opportunity here in the energy transition. Our model that we're working with our partners is around taking advantage of any hydrocarbon, and in the case of the projects we're looking at, natural gas and coal, but also using biomass and MSW, landfill waste as part of the economics, and helping bring together multiple technologies. And we're technology agnostic, but a lot of the new technologies may not on their own at this point be commercial or economically viable, but together can become very strongly economically viable, especially where you have the advantages that First Nations and tribes has, as I mentioned, with the hydrocarbon, with the geology, and importantly, usually these resources are far away from the end consumer. And so we can use technologies to help better utilize the advantages and avoid the disadvantages that these nations have. And in our case, our core technology is around oxy-combustion technologies, where we can take a hydrocarbon and convert that into zero carbon heat and power, and use that power and heat into breaking up resources like methane and like coal, and creating hydrogen. So decarbonized hydrogen, where the CO2 that is created through that whole process can be sequestered and take advantage of the other aspects of the infrastructure that are creating CO2, to have that amount of CO2 that makes the carbon sequestration economically viable, and creating kind of a hub. And that word is used a lot, but that's where you're taking a lot of different entities that are and using the synergy of those processes together. Now, hydrogen we believe in the hydrogen revolution. We believe in that as an important decarbonized fuel, but how do you get it from these areas that are more remote to the areas that need it? And we believe that we can do that through ammonia. Ammonia is a key part of our near-term strategy with our First Nations and tribal partners, where you're taking, instead of using carbon as the transport mechanism for molecules like methane or with coal, you're actually taking that, breaking it apart, the carbon, and dealing with that at the source. So that tribal entity, that First Nations entity, can actually not only be extracting the resource, but also servicing that valuable decarbonization process, and then making use of their geology to put that CO2 in the ground. So there's actual enhanced value added, which is more jobs and more value to those local areas. And then with nitrogen, replacing that carbon with nitrogen, you're making a stable, easier to transport platform for the hydrogen, and that can be railed, that can be piped. Again, more infrastructure that can be useful, that the First Nations and tribes can participate in, and then deliver that molecule down to those end consumers without any hydrogen, without any carbon issue. So it could be either cracked or burned or processed or used in ways that produce no carbon dioxide. So as I mentioned, our key near-term strategy with some of these projects and our partners is around ammonia, which is around using the oxycombustion with their hydrocarbon, converting the hydrocarbon into hydrogen, and using the ammonia, the nitrogen to produce ammonia. Specifically, we have 3 projects that we're looking to develop around that core strategy with our key partner, Frog Lake Nation in Alberta. We have a project specifically on their sovereign land, and then we have a project in Saskatchewan with the White Bear Nation, and we have a project in Kimmer, Southwest Wyoming, which is another great area for geology. This isn't on or related to tribes right now, but we are talking with the Crow, the Eastern Shoshone, Northern Arapaho, the Cheyenne River Sioux about how they can be involved. And this is part of our DNA, part of our business model to really co-develop projects. And so while the other 2 projects I mentioned have inherent business model around working with the First Nation, in Kimmer, we're open to different ways that First Nations can be directly involved in this project and a related pipeline project that I'll talk about a little bit later. And so before I hand it over to Clifton, represents our key partner, Frog Lake Nation, just wanted to reemphasize we're focused on the energy transition. We believe hydrogen, we believe zero carbon power, and we believe CCUS is an important part of that and can be a huge opportunity for resource tribes and First Nations, given this will allow them to further develop their hydrocarbons, but also benefit from the geology that allowed them to participate in CCUS and the value-added service of carbon capture and sequestration. Let me just hand it over to Clifton.
Thank you, Jeremy. Great job. It's been an honor and privilege to be working with Canada and Canada US. Jeremy's been a partner with us for a year and more, a year and some. I'm just going to load up my PowerPoint for you guys, and I'll explain everything in detail as I go. So, as I mentioned before, I'm just going to close this. As I mentioned before, I'm from Frog Lake First Nations. I'd like to take a time to just allow you a little bit of history for Frog Lake. Now, we are a signatory for the Treaty 6 Treaty of Canada, one of the numbered treaties in 1976. We were branded, Frog Lake First Nation was branded a rebel band after the Northwest Rebellion, which included the Frog Lake Massacre. The province was established in 1904, and we sit clearly right in the center of the Midwest. Now, it's important to understand our location. The oil and gas community that we are has functionally operated in the industry for 20 plus years. So we're no stranger to the energy system. And over the years, we've worked with both the province, the provincial government, and the federal government to ensure not only the benefit of our peoples in the area, but non-Aboriginal, non-Indigenous populations that surround us, ensuring that our treaties are adhered to and enforced by our recognition of them and our continued partnership throughout the country. Now, Frog Lake First Nations is the little community. It looks like a little boot, a little ballroom shoe, much like Cinderella. And the community itself is adjacent to the town of Limburg, right against the North Saskatchewan River. Also has a neighboring Métis settlement right beside it, across from the lake. It is functionally between the Lloydminster city and the city of Cold Lake. Now, going through the pandemic and the national downturn in energy prices in the last couple of years, Frog Lake First Nations had its first case in November 2020. Now, in 2020, the chief of our nation asked us how we can supply the nation with sustenance, food and water. Nothing was developed in our First Nation. So he asked all of us council members to go home and come back with a plan on how to address this epidemic that hit our community, this pandemic that is threatening the lives of our community members. If the municipalities close their doors, if the cities close their doors, how would we sustain our population with food security, water security, and energy security? My proposal to the chief at that time was to develop Frog Lake Legacy Energy and Alternative Power and make it a 30-year plan to become sovereign in those areas that I just mentioned, but present it in a way that it's a holistic, sovereign, intergenerational strategic plan to address all our needs of our community and lift up the standard of living for our peoples. Because we were the first economy of the lands with the fur trade and the Hudson's Bay Company that later became Rupert's Land, later became the Federation of Canada. We were always here to provide for those who needed it. The settlers that came and did not recognize the land, we helped them survive, and we expect that reciprocation of our relationship will expand past the industrial revolution, past the oil and gas industry, and into the transition needed for our planet to sustain its life. So we sustained our vibrant culture. We sustained our connection to the land and its occupants. We sustained the connection to our creator and our culture and traditions, all while functionally helping the economic boom that was happening in Alberta. For 20 plus years, we developed 600 wells on our traditional territories within our reserve boundaries. We actually abandoned half of those wells in the past 2 years, 1.5 years. So utilizing our energy to get to the next step was always our destination, and reverting the industrial process and the footprint we left on the environment, repairing that was our goal. We are well underway in that, and we are well on our way to making that transition happen. Groundwater wells and groundwater vulnerability is something that we need to identify. And when we're talking about CCS and CCUS, we need to make sure that the land-based occupants, pre-colonial occupants, can be a part of this process to guarantee that none of our contaminants hit the water supply or the soil. We developed a strategy and made 4 key pillars our strength needed to develop this. Spirituality being number 1, our people being close number 2, governance and administration, and then financial sustainability became our 4 pillars to live by. So we developed in those quadrants the medicine wheel mentality and developed a circular economy through mapping. We brought out all of our major players. There were 31 entities, including the provincial government, federal government, and all components of polytechnics and engineering firms from around Calgary and Edmonton, where all the major players were working on innovation projects. And we were lucky enough to sign on board with a bunch of these major players in the industry. We developed a sticky notes format that you saw us doing on the floor. We converted that over to digital mapping and created an infrastructure master plan for the use of our entire community for the 30 years that we were going after. Much of these are well on their way on becoming great revenue generators for our nation. We came back to the drawing board and developed a Gantt chart for all of our various projects, one of which being a solar farm that will supply our nation with 1.21 gigawatts of electricity to be put to the grid, to be sold as PPA agreements, and to be functionally adding our clean energy to the projects that we are unlocking around our area. We also need to develop our capacity. So we have the skill set from the oil industry that we would need to transfer knowledge into the new economy that was coming. So we decided to focus on our industrial center of our community. Right next and across to our powwow grounds would be that complex that would serve as providing innovators, engineers, the training mechanisms to build the capacity in the area, in the community, and the surrounding regions. We also would like to make sure that when we build with a net zero energy and a carbon neutral strategy for our buildings. In terms of tourism and legacy, in terms of tourism, we focus on a project that is a community-wide walkway path that also does a bunch of important things. It can provide solar and wind street lights that actually provide further energy-inducing mechanisms in our community to lower the cost of those services provided to our members and to our facilities. It also provides a conduit to deliver water, electricity, natural gas to each and every home, making sure that it's creating an actual functional First Nation-led microgrid within a community that is struggling to pay its bills. We also would utilize the trail to signify specific events throughout our history. The Frog Lake Massacre, the uncovered of unmarked graves are big milestones, but there's a history here that we need to share with our non-Indigenous partners and people from around the world, and they would be done in the form of legacy stones. These stones would be etched stones that provide those history elements in English, Cree, French, and syllabics. In terms of hydrogen, our strategy was to take part in this hydrogen convention here in Edmonton. We actually applied to be a presenter this coming year at the new hydrogen convention and hoping to hear great things from that. We are working on several projects in the surrounding area that lead right into what we want to accomplish in our region for the benefit of our First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and non-Indigenous communities. So utilizing the structure we built with LEAP, Legacy Energy and Alternative Power, we are going after a land base that is just off our community. So to the right, you see Frog Lake First Nations with the 2 adjacent communities that amalgamated to form Frog Lake. Above there, you see the Pengrowth Energy Corporation on the very top left, and that is actually the Strathcona SAGD plant that Frog Lake partially owns. We are pursuing the purchase of a Windsor Cell plant that enables us to actually do a lot more. So creating almost polar indicators in the region will cause us to actually enable the activation of the Regional Ecosystem Accelerator, a carbon hemp hydrogen hub, what we like to call Reach 2. And in this area, we actually want to develop a streamline for all of our carbon, hemp, and our hydrogen aspirations. So we lay out the land, much as a buffalo would, making sure that we do not waste any opportunities. When we survived off the buffalo, we created all of our sustainable resources around that buffalo and utilized it to the point where there was never any waste. Mother Earth was in balance. And that's what we'd like to offer our region and our economic base system. In terms of CCUS and CCS, we were part of that, the problem. Put in HGs into the atmosphere. We will now pull them out using direct air capture methods, using what Jeremy described with Canada, and utilizing natural gas, sequestering the CO2 and burying it into Precambrian chambers, much like what is happening here in Pathways. And I'd like to go right into that part of my presentation, utilizing the community's influence in the surrounding area and the industry. We are reaching out to Coal Lake First Nations just north of us, the municipality of El Point, and then the Cree Nation just north of us again. And then expanding this consortium to actually apply a regional effort with hemp, hydrogen, and carbon being the backbone of that effort. We actually plan further to develop our community so that it attaches itself to recreational activities, but leads into the format so that we can feed into the strategy all of the current elements that are being developed around us. The food security elements, we actually are making sure that we have a foothold on the international stage, and hopefully with our fingers crossed, we will be on the stage in Rome in March, pursuing holistic Indigenous food security options to the entire world. Introducing elements with the hydrogen buses and the electric buses into the region to get our employees to and from the area, to work in Pathways project, which is just north of us, to work in the hemp industry that we're developing throughout Alberta and into Saskatchewan. Any questions you have? I will also, just before I finish, I will also mention the fact that Canada and its unique relationship with First Nations opened up a very useful tool to us, and in the form of strategic partnership initiatives. That program actually bottlenecks all of Canada's programs into one accessible area for First Nations, and they are very good at pulling in economic development, land operations, even capital projects and social programming into one area so that we can meet the needs of a community that cannot hold together its resources strong enough to actually functionally apply for funds like this. And then it allows the operations to reach out to other First Nations so we can build consortiums to form a stronger mechanism. And then in the provincial side, you have the formation of 3 years ago when the UCP introduced the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. And it's a $1 billion backstop for the First Nations to apply and actually have that footing to go after large operations such as the SAGD plant. Frog Lake was beneficial enough to expand its lease agreement with the Strathcona SAGD plant, and it's still benefiting our communities. It's a passive investment, but so is the Enbridge 3 pipelines that Frog Lake is a part of, a large consortium of 23 First Nations in our area that just signed on that deal. And not to mention the fact that there's 136 First Nations from Alberta to the Pacific Coast in BC, all working together to make sure that TMX is an opportunity that we can all look forward to. And my thing is to make sure that we don't just stop there at the pipelines, that we include the right-of-way access points to make sure that ownership and equity is at the First Nations hands, and we can apply those mechanisms, those holistic ways of learning, to make sure there's room for hydrogen pipelines and CO2 pipelines. Streaming that source, we are pro pipeline, we are pro environment, and making sure that those two meet a balance. With that, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the opportunity. Hey, hey.
Yeah, thank you very much. We do have one question here from Belvin Pete. What entity did you create to manage your energy program? Did you start a utility or a standing committee?
We started a steering committee to make sure that we had the right people with the right brain power at the table. And then we started our corporations. We didn't want to stand up any companies prior to them being ready. We made sure that we did the feasibility studies, the capacity studies, to make sure that we had the people on the floor to make sure we move forward. And the consortium that we developed is actually just a corporate body, a JPLP structure. Once you have your JP in place, the LPs come on board if they see fit. And actually, we made it a simple structure that we repeated over and over again with these projects, given the opportunity for funders, for partners, for LP members to actually come out and see our catalog, what fit their community, what fit their municipality to work with. That option should be actually first and foremost when the funders are asking for shovel-ready projects. You want to make sure that your minds already have an inkling of what that can be.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the only question we have so far. Please go ahead.
Michelle, I think Jeremy, you were gonna continue after Clifton's presentation.
Right, and actually CJ has joined us. If CJ, do you want to introduce yourself? If not, I can share my screen and continue. So I just wanted to point to another project, because the point of this webinar is how do we help the DOE help ourselves or help these projects and bridge the gap where there's great opportunities that tribes have, that the DOE could play a role. Well, in Wyoming, I mentioned that we have a project Kemmer, which is a coal to ammonia project, and we are talking with local tribes around how they can be involved. We're certainly open to all sorts of business models. One of the other projects that came out of this is, because it's decarbonized, we're looking at how to sequester the CO2. It's a great area. The Green River area has enormous sequestration availability, and there's projects that are looking at several sequestration projects and companies, including Exxon and others that are looking to utilize the geology. And so one of the opportunities that came out of the DOE recently was a financing opportunity announcement around a open access CO2 pipeline. We worked with several key partners in the area. These are all partners that operate in Wyoming and that we thought fit what the DOE was looking for with a specific FOA, which was in an open access CO2 pipeline that linked multiple sources and multiple sinks. That really was an important piece of infrastructure worth the federal government investing in the FEED study to help it get to a commercial decision. And here we picked partners such as Williams, who will be the operator of the pipeline, and several companies such as CarbonVert and Live Oak Environmental, who are carbon sequestration specific companies that have projects along the proposed pipeline, and a couple projects such as Canada America and Glenrock Energy, which are carbon capture companies. So we think we fit the bill there. This project, as I said, project is responding to a FOA. And we would like, we think there's clear advantages for the local tribes and other tribes, and CJ can, or Clifton specifically can talk about how he's seeing it from his lens. But there's indirect and direct benefits. Obviously, having a big infrastructure project like this creates some economic opportunities, even if it's not on the reservation per se. There's apprenticeship programs, workforce training programs, opportunities for union jobs. We're working with the University of Wyoming to really facilitate those conversations. But there's also importantly the ability with a pipeline infrastructure like this, which is why the DOE is looking to fund this, to really build an infrastructure, critical piece of infrastructure to help bring in decarbonization, to help facilitate decarbonization, and to help push that CO2 to areas where it can be both utilized for low oil production, low carbon oil production, I should say, and geological sequestration. And these are both areas where a resource tribes like the Northern Rapo, the Eastern Shoshone, Northern Rapo, and the Wind River, having the ability to link into critical infrastructure such as a CO2 pipeline can allow them to decarbonize some of their current operations or expand in heavy industry and resource development, and also provide the CO2 needed for further utilization of their resources, such as enhanced oil recovery, so low carbon oil development. And so it's projects like this where it seems perfect for this kind of initiative, where the DOE is looking at how they can play a role and how they can help the economic development of tribes. And this is a perfect opportunity where the DOE, we're responding to a DOE opportunity, and we want to work with tribes to really figure out how this opportunity, as we go through the development stage and the front-end engineering stage, to figure out working with the tribes and other midstream companies that can facilitate the both taking of CO2 and delivering of CO2 to projects, how that can enhance the economic development of the tribes. And I wanted to stop there, but hopefully this is a good place to start to open up the conversation on what is the right way that the DOE can play a role in, and opportunities like this, where they would be funding the initial important engineering and design work, and we can work with the tribes, both the local tribes and other tribes, on not only indirect benefits, the ones I mentioned, but also Clifton mentioned examples in Canada where consortiums of tribes are actually owners of the critical infrastructure that doesn't have to be on the tribe, but actually is taking advantage of the resources, but giving an opportunity for them to play a bigger role in the energy transition.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have one question for Jeremy. Where are you getting the electric power for your Wyoming TCH project? Can you purchase wholesale power?
Yeah, so it's a good question. We're actually looking at locating it on the mine site, the Kemmerer mine. We are producing our own. Initially, we were thinking of producing excess power and connecting it to the grid through Rocky Mountain Power's infrastructure system there, where they have a power plant that's being decommissioned, a coal power plant that's being decommissioned by the end of 2025, the Naughton plant, and Rocky Mountain is also working with there's a nuclear facility, SMR, that is expected to be developed later this decade that will use some of that capacity. But that was our initial thinking. Just to make things simple, though, we are looking at right-sizing the power production that we will have to what is needed. Obviously, ammonia synthesis requires a lot of power. There's a lot of heat being produced. We're going to be converting that heat production, as well as using that off gas to produce our own power and power that behind the fence, if you will. But obviously, if there is an opportunity to wheel power to other operations, there's Chute Creek, there's other industrial interests in the area, and there's also it's a significant business of exporting power from Wyoming outside of the state, and so connecting to some of those projects like Anschutz or others that are going to be wheeling power, and most of the power from places like Anschutz will be wind. So being able to to provide that dispatchable power into that would be very valuable. So we're open to those, but right now we're focused on something that is much more simple and we can control.
Okay, we do have one more question. Are you using any other federal grant funding besides the FEED study?
So for that pipeline, the pipeline has some cost sharing, and that's cost sharing from those the commercial partners that were listed, as well as some contribution from the Wyoming state through the Wyoming Energy Authority, because this is a very important project in Wyoming. Wyoming wants to be as a goal to be negative carbon. Now they are the second largest energy producing state in the country with only a population of just over 500,000. So they're a massive exporting energy state, and they produce a lot of their energy from CO2 emitting sources, although they're moving towards wind and nuclear. Still, in the foreseeable future, the hydrocarbons are going to be a big part of the business. So having a CO2 pipeline that enables, facilitates easier decarbonization, both on reservation and off reservation, is important for the state of Wyoming. So I expect that they'll be very supportive. And they are somewhat for this cost sharing, but definitely for politically to help us support the project. And I think here and this is maybe an opportunity where lessons learned from our partners in Canada, where working with Alberta is not aligned a lot of the time with the federal government ideologically and politically, especially around hydrocarbons. And it's a great opportunity for partners like First Nations Resource, First Nations like Frog Lake to really help mediate between in Canada the provincial and the federal, so that interests can be aligned and that we can get the right funding and information that can develop these projects. And so similar in Wyoming, where you have a state that is often on the other side of the objectives from the federal government, where tribes both in source, but there's a lot of tribes that are home to Wyoming originally and have some commitment there, that I think there's a great opportunity to work together and help the state and help the federal government reach the same goals, which is decarbonization, but also making use of our own resources so that we can maintain the lifestyle that we've had in most of the country, and we can actually make improvements on some of these less advantaged populations, such as on the reservation, where they can really benefit from low cost energy, but not sacrificing on the environment.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are all the questions we have so far.
Well, I'd like to chime in, Jeremy, with some comments and some questions of my own, but I wanted to go back to what you had mentioned. Like I said, this is a great project. It's a great camera project in Wyoming. Is a great project to illustrate the potential for tribal participation in CCUS and power to X. Using power to create ammonia and hydrogen potentially in the future. So it's a great illustrative project. And then also back to Clifton and his First Nation and their projects they're working on. It also brought up some good points. And so I think it's a lot of food for thought. And I think that's the whole point to this webinar, is to bring up some ideas and then also bring up some points for discussion, further education, and education dissemination out there. The first thing I'd like to mention, because Clifton had mentioned in his presentation, highlighted a little bit of a difference between how things work with tribes in the U.S. and how things work with First Nations in Canada. And one of the differences is that, Jeremy alluded to that as well, in terms of, he mentioned some of the large or consortiums of First Nations that have come together on energy projects and when it comes to equity and different things. The system in Canada around First Nations is much more consortium oriented than the tribes. And I give an example. A friend of mine by the name of Manny Jules, he was the chief of his First Nation Kamloops in British Columbia. He was one of the founders of the First Nations Tax Commission. And so basically, he helped the federal government and First Nations created an entity which crosses most of the First Nations, not all of them, but is an entity which collects taxes and then distributes the taxes back to the First Nations. Well, we don't do that in the United States. In the United States, each tribe is sovereign and they collect their own taxes if they do collect taxes. So we don't have, and so on the financing side, on the infrastructure side, the First Nations basically have a leg up, I think, in terms of how they operate in this space than the tribes do. I think it would be great if we had a more simpler system where tribes could form consortiums easily, and then use those consortiums to do things to better their communities. But you don't see that very often. Not that can't happen. I think that it can. We've seen a consortium of Lakota, of tribes in South Dakota, North Dakota, in the Dakotas, in and around. They created a wind authority to create wind power on their reservations, and then off to export it off the reservation. So consortiums can happen in and around energy. They're just very rare in Indian country, and so I just say that the First Nations there are much more open to that than what we've found in the U.S. Second, I'd like to point out as well that it's great that Jeremy had mentioned that his project was able to apply for a financing opportunity that just came out, that just closed, in regards to the CO2 pipeline, the FEED study. That's something that I think that as for illustrative purposes, I think is important, because we don't see that as well in Indian countries a lot, in terms of not just the DOE, but all the federal agencies. There's really not many solicitations that are specific to tribes that offer the front end engineering, the front end development capital as a grant for tribes. So I think hopefully that those, as we can see, those exist. And so I think that it will be for illustrative purposes, we can illustrate back to our partners at the DOE and in general in the federal government that we don't have to recreate the wheel. They exist. So if we just develop programs and funding that can specifically benefit tribes when it comes to the FEED studies or the early development capital, I think that that's what's missing. And I'm glad that it was pointed out. Also, one question, but before that question, I wanted to have CJ introduce himself, since he wasn't able to earlier because of technical issues. But if CJ, if you can introduce yourself to the group, it'd be great at this point.
Yeah, I apologize. We had some technical difficulties with some links here that we're trying to get together, but yeah, my name is CJ Stewart. You know, I've served on the Crow legislative branch, sat on council for 2 terms, 8 years, and served as natural resources chairman for those 8 years, infrastructure chairman for those 8 years. Am I coming in okay?
There's a little feedback. Is your mic attached to the machine, the laptop computer?
I'm speaking to the laptop right now.
Okay. I don't know if there's anything we can do about it. Feel free to continue.
I just feel uncomfortable talking when no one else can really hear me very well, I guess. But I
can understand. It's just a little bit of feedback.
I don't know what else to do here. All right.
It's okay. It's just a little bit of static. But
Can you hear me now? Right. Clifton from Canada can't hear me very well, but he's in Canada, so he's pretty far away. He's the one that's asking me, saying that you can't hear me. So yeah, I've served on the council for 2 terms, you know, and I've been involved with many energy projects, co-founder of the National Energy Association, and have worked as a energy advisor and consultant with the Crow tribe. Currently, I'm the energy director for the Crow Nation, and so I just wanted to kind of speak to some of this. I know that a while back there was a group, you know, that, you know, I know Daniel was talking about consortiums, and CERT was there at one time, and you know, I think CERT, you know, did its job, you know, and it did its job to the point where it worked its way out of a job. But we're coming into a new era where we're going to need, you know, more assistance for tribes, and that's what this webinar is all about. Identifying these areas in Indian country, and I say Indian country because 60% of the nation's fossil fuel resources are in Indian country. This nation, the United States, and so you're going to hear me say that every time because it's a fact. And so, you know, we're here, we're talking about the clean energy aspect, and other tribes such as myself, coal fossil fuel tribes that are working with individuals and creating innovative ways and ideas and spitballing better ways to create production and still have a great environment, you know, along with it. So, you know, that's me in a nutshell. And I apologize for the technical difficulties, and I've listened to, and I've talked with Jeremy and his group, and the things that they're doing, you know, with Jeremy and his net zero technology that they're doing over there, and then coming into the States with Kimmerer. And so, these are exciting times, and I think that tribes are in a position where we're fitted and ready to participate. We just need to be given a chance. So that's what these webinars are for, to identify these areas, opportunities, possibilities, and advantages and disadvantages. And so I'm going to hand it right back to Daniel and Jeremy. Thank you.
Thank you, CJ. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but I did want to ask a question to Clifton in regards to his presentation, because there's a follow-up to it, and it's important. He had mentioned maybe as a point of reference, if you could explain the size of your reserve in acres, because we don't and the population of the enrollment of your tribe, or as well as tribe, First Nation, but as well as the population that lives on the reserve. That might be just a little for a point of reference that would be helpful for us.
Absolutely. I can't give you acreages because I don't have my notes in front of me from that. But the highway, the secondary highway that goes through it is 21 kilometers long. The population base on our band list is 3315, and then the population that live on reserve is roughly 1,800, with the rest spread out through the province and situated in the major cities, Edmonton and Calgary.
And the reason I asked that is because I think another aspect of what I've seen you allude to is the benefits that you came up with, the four-pronged, I guess, the thing about how it would benefit your people, and money was just one of them of the four. But how will it benefit your people in terms of the higher education, workforce development? Is there close by in the towns that are or the cities that are nearby, or does the First Nation have its own higher education? How does that work? How is that working?
Right now, we have an on-site campus here in Frog Lake. It's a training facility, and Portage College is one of our partners. But in the higher planes of planning for this energy transition, we've reached out and created MOUs with the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, SAIT, and also the sister institute, the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, NATE. Also, the University of Alberta, situated in Edmonton, and the University of Calgary, obviously in Calgary. Now, also, we've brought in Polytechs to make sure that we're developing these micro credentials that actually make that transition happen easier throughout training aspects. And employment to training and applied research and development is really where you want to showcase that effort. So we like you pointed out, our population base cannot really supply the workers needed for that. That's why we have to form consortium and work with our regional partners like the Métis, the other First Nation in the area, and of course the municipalities. It's only with that population base that we can move forward, and it is our actual honor to make sure that we're holding that treaty base accountable. Both sides of the treaty coin, the First Nations and the visiting non-Indigenous communities, benefit from this ESG focused effort by the First Nation communities, by the Indigenous communities, full scale, making sure that the techno-economics is first and foremost explained as a benefit to the entire region, province, Midwest, and national interests.
Well, I'm glad, Clifton, that you mentioned the ESG, because although that's not really a lot of the focus in the US, but one of the things that has been developed under this administration, under the Biden administration, one of the first things that the administration did was they created an executive order around equity, and basically it's evolved into a thing called the Justice 40 initiative here in the US. And so basically the Justice 40 initiative is specific federal monies that have been designated within our infrastructure bill, and then the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, have been they fall underneath the Justice 40 initiative, and basically that's a mandate from the feds. A lot of it is under DOE, but it's a mandate from the feds that mandates that if a project developer gets those resources, whether it's a guaranteed loan or a direct loan or funding from the federal government, that 40% at minimum of the direct and indirect benefits must flow to what they call disadvantaged communities, which include tribal communities. And so it's something that I don't think exists in Canada, but it's something, because you mentioned ESG, it's the closest thing that we have right now. And to me, it's just starting. Like I said, the federal government is just starting to roll it out. The funds, the resources that they're granting are just starting to happen. So it's less than a year old. And so we haven't really seen the benefits yet, but it's something that I'm very, I have high hopes for. Because especially here in the US, the ESG movement, which is, it's just a standard, for ways for investors to figure out where their money's going, where they can invest, where they feel comfortable investing. But here, ESG's gotten a bad rap, it's gotten a bad name in the media and within our politics. So rather than talk about ESG, we want to talk about the Justice 40. But basically, it's talking about equity. And you mentioned in your presentation about the some of the things that you guys have put into your plan and that you guys have started to implement around equity at the actual equity level, right, at the actual ownership part of these projects with your partners. And so I just wanted to mention that that's going, and so really it really hasn't touched Indian country yet, Justice 40, but my hopes is that it will continue and move beyond the politics here in the US. So I just wanted to mention that because I know I think that's a not just from your project, but from other projects that I've heard of and understand in with First Nations, that the equity and is very important to your communities.
It is. And Daniel, I just want to mention the fact that in the broad scheme of things, all the First Nations really would like to do is make sure that we're on that stage, the international stage that we've been kind of not been able to approach in the recent years. And I think that one of the mechanisms to do that, to actually make positive change in our two countries, is to reach out to each other and establish a pre-colonial trade route. Now, I developed a project that'll actually enable that. I call it the I2H2 Greenway Project. And if you're interested, please throw me a line, because what we need to do is really develop the projects before there's funding, develop the ideas and concepts before there's funding, and then share those ideas and concepts with people that are interested so that we can pursue funding together. Because I believe that you're months away from establishing what we've been lucky enough here in Canada to utilize to the best of our abilities. The funding sources are opening up so much here that it's almost making your head spin. And I think that's by design, so that every opportunity is given to the different levels of developing First Nations settlements and Inuit out here. And I think that you guys are just having that door swung open wide for you. So if we can lend a hand at methodologies, at the different, I want to say, maps that we have been able to create, at the different examples that we've been able to successfully come to the benefit from, then we will share that. And I think that our communities can benefit by integrating our knowledge, our traditional knowledge, into the work that we're doing to make sure that we are proper stewards of our land and our authorities.
Well, Clifton, I'm glad that you mentioned the cross-border potential for partnerships between the First Nations and the tribes, because why is that happening to me here? The reason I like that idea is because I've been participating for the last, I don't know how many years, with an organization, or it's not really an organization, it's an initiative within the Hoover Institution at Stanford called Renewing Indigenous Economies. And it's this idea of, as you mentioned, we were the first, business people of our continent. We had these vast trade networks up and through North and South America prior to contact. And so it's in our DNA, it's in our blood, it's in our heritage, and to be business people and traders and have commerce and have an economy. And so it's something that's not foreign to us. But Renewing Indigenous Economies, that project at Hoover, also includes the Maori in New Zealand, and it includes, that's why I had mentioned previously, Manny Jules, who's a former chief of the Kamloops First Nation in British Columbia. He's part of that Renewing Indigenous Economies. And I met Manny years ago while they were sharing this initiative with me. And so it's something that I participated in. And I think I love the idea of learning more about your initiative that you mentioned, I2H2, if I got it right. But and maybe that's another source for conversation later on one of our. We have 4 more webinars left, so after this one, to potentially be a topic as well. But I did want to go back. There were some questions internally from in regards to maybe that are geared towards Jeremy. There was a question from Mike in regards to will you use Wyoming? Will you use the Wyoming CO2 pipeline corridor? And he believes that there is some kind of funding for CO2 pipelines within Wyoming. So that'd be something that you could speak to in regards to your CO2 pipeline.
Yeah, so we are, and in fact, that's one of the reasons why we, with the University of Wyoming, were able to get this respond, because this was one of the first FOAs, and there was not a long lead time to develop the full proposal, and we got a really good commercial proposal in that is unlike maybe some of the FOAs. This is a project that will go all the way to FID, and the intent is the participants are going to commercialize that. That's the whole intent. That's why we spent time and money into the proposal, is because the intent is to develop a CO2 pipeline out of this. But absolutely, the pre-work that the Wyoming state did in pre-permitting these corridors put this project as a leg up into other potential. There was that needed to have a certain amount of progress already done, and that allowed us to have that. And because we had these partners that were both sequestration companies and carbon capture companies and a midstream company, we kind of had everything there. But we would not have been able to do it if it weren't for the work of the state of Wyoming to do that. Now, it's interesting to note that we're quite a bit further from the Wind River Reservation, and the Wind River Reservation doesn't have as much CO2 emissions as some of the areas that we're trying to cut through. But also, the corridor didn't really involve the reservation, and that's maybe an oversight. And that's just, I guess, something that we need to work more diligently between these communities, between these two sovereigns, the state and the two tribes that are living within the boundaries, is how do we work together so that when there's an opportunity like this, now maybe this wasn't the best opportunity directly to run it through Wind River, but there could be opportunities in the future that the Wind River Energy Commission and the tribes themselves would want to participate, but would need the cooperation that we were benefiting from. So I think that's just another area where being proactive, both from the state side and from the federal government side and from the tribal government side, really engaging each other, because these things are, this is, as I mentioned, a once in a generation or multi-generational opportunity. And it's these little advantages that helps get us to the point where we can take advantage of the opportunity.
Well, I agree, Jeremy. That's why I had mentioned that. I wanted to bring up that question that was asked. But I being from Wyoming, I do know a little bit about the history of the CO2 corridor that Wyoming created. And yes, like I'll use the word that you used. It was an oversight by the state, because it's in the past, but in my opinion, the state didn't try hard enough to engage with the tribes to include the Wind River Reservation in the energy corridor. So if you look at the Wyoming CO2 corridor map that was put together, where the reservation is, it's blank. It's and so but the important thing that people need to know is that the first oil in Wyoming was actually produced on the Wind River Indian Reservation. So and it's still produced. This oil field still produces to this day. And so the all sides, the tribes and the feds and the state need to come together in Wyoming, not just in Wyoming, but all the western states, and do a better job at collaborating and working together, because really it's not any one group's fault why that wasn't included, why the tribes weren't included in that corridor, but it's everybody's responsibility as to why that doesn't exist. And so but everybody needs to do a better job, including industry as well. I mean, like I said, the Wind River Reservation has the longest relationship with oil and gas in the state, and will continue to do so as long as their oil wells continue to produce. So it's been well over 100 years, 120 years, probably more or more. I think it's even up to 130 years that they've been producing. But and one of the first probably tribes in the U.S. that produced oil. But like I said, we're glad that you were able to present, and glad that you were able to bring up some of these really important issues with Wyoming. I saw that CJ had his hand up. Did you want to ask a question, or did you have any comments, CJ?
Yeah, it was just I think we kind of went past it about 100 miles, but I'll back up a little bit. I had a question there. I know Clifton and Jeremy's been, working in all these different areas. So what I was looking at was, the blockchain and the Bitcoin mining. Is that something that you guys are getting involved in as well?
Clifton, do you want to take that, or should I?
How about her, Jeremy?
Absolutely. So, Bitcoin is about energy, and where you have stranded energy resources, like as you pointed out, the tribes and First Nations are blessed with enormous energy potential, and it's about converting that energy into value in a sustainable way. And certainly where you're converting the hydrocarbon into heat and power, that heat and power can be converted to electricity, and then you got to get that electricity out. And if you can convert that electricity into a digital asset on site, and then digitally transmit that to anywhere in the world instantly for value that can be transferred into other forms of value, that's a great opportunity. And so absolutely, where we don't have load, either we don't have the transmission lines that are there, or that the transmission lines that have the capacity to take that load, then being able to put up data centers. And it doesn't have to be just Bitcoin mining in places in Wyoming, where, for example, staying on the Wyoming, there is the largest consumer of electricity in Cheyenne, which is where I'm based, is data centers. And there are opportunities along the fiber optic line where you can convert power into a data center service. But also Bitcoin mining and other digital assets is an opportunity. So, and we believe, and this is actually related, but not directly on the power. We're also working with our tribal partners, and Clifton has been really key in this, around if we're putting the CO2 in the ground, can we track that? Can we create a digital asset around that? Can we better monitor that? And this is going to take the effort of businesses, of academic institutions. Clifton mentioned SAIT. We're working with SAIT. We're working with the University of Wyoming, and then it's going to take the federal government and state government. Places like Wyoming and North Dakota have primacy around Class 6 wells. DEQ is going to be responsible in Wyoming. We need to be working with all these entities where we can create value that's on the digital side as well, that leverages the geological and resource assets that the First Nations and tribal partners have.
One other thought and question, I guess, in this space with the hydrogen, not only just in Canada but as well as in the United States, has any of the participants with the Kimmerer project and in those areas, have they taken any thought in including tribal colleges and academia I think that would be, I think this would definitely be something of an opportunity for, I mean, there's a dozen tribal colleges just in the area, and I know that this would definitely be something that would be beneficial for you know, our tribal students of all ages, of course. And, you know, it would help at the same time, you know, explain, you know, what's going on, because a lot of people don't understand what's going on. So I think we need to reach out and, you know, to the youth, to the college students, you know, and, you know, identify these areas. I know there's a transition, you know, some folks are talking about transitioning away from fossil fuels. You know, then again, you know, you look at the world and everybody's transitioning to fossil fuels. And so somewhere along the way, there's going to be a happy medium. And so I think we need to be ready for that. And I think I just need to make that comment because, you know, I believe that, you know, when it comes down to it, we're talking about the environment, we're talking about workforce development, you know, empowerment, and, you know, Daniel's talked about the Justice 40 initiative and that piece. And, you know, there's a lot of opportunity here for the impoverished areas. And, you know, and I don't want it to make it a fight for the bottom, but, you know, there is opportunity there for folks to rise above their situation. And so I think this is, you know, this was just something I wanted to mention to you. Has any thought, or in any of your colleagues have given that any thought as well?
Clifton, again, I want to give you the chance to respond to that first.
Well, in terms of capacity development and community engagement, one of the great things, and I mentioned SPI, at the start of the year in January, we applied for strategic planning funds to do some feasibility studies. Now, we were granted $700,000 to get 4 separate feasibility studies. Inside of that was a lot of community engagement and capacity development opportunities. So we expanded that and made sure that like data management was one of the items that we touched base on. Sorry, I put on my screen. I was waving around my hands and making it more interesting for you, and you guys didn't see it. But anyhow, so making sure that the capacity development was a part of the stream is a major component. So SATE promised to come down and do some training on site with some of the projects, and then we got a couple more feasibility studies in terms of food security, water security, and energy security. So now we carry that work forward with us and do more community engagement. Like you said, a lot of people don't understand the process and what is it going to be. Even if they're in the field in oil and gas, those skill sets are very transferable, but they don't know how. So we need to actually give them the information, show them that they can be working in geothermal projects. They could be working in CCUS projects, because we already have the dirt work and the digging skill sets to make sure that we're a part of the industry. We're making water pipes that we need in our communities that actually we need wholeheartedly. If you don't know the current situation in Canada, most of our First Nations do not have water from their taps, so we can't use it. There's boil water advisories. In fact, you got loads and loads of scars upon scars from the rashes I get from the water delivery. Now, it's our responsibility to take control of the environment, and any harm done to it, but also our own people cannot suffer this way. So if you have a feasible water supply pipeline, then you're already guaranteed the capacity within your nation to work with that kind of pipeline. We also do the same thing in development of gas lines and oil pipelines. That's just one skill set. The ones that are drilling, that are on the rigs, we're pulling those people in. Then you got your transportation industry. We're developing the capacity as we go. It's just to show the linkages. Hydrogen can be the new transport. CO2 can be the new transport. And all of those are applicable. We just got to show them how.
No, I appreciate those comments. That's something that, you know, I know we always talk about the development aspect of, you know, with First Nations and native tribes, and, you know, in the lower 48 here, and of course Alaska. But at the same time, we're like there was a comment made, you know, I think by Jeremy, made a comment said this is the greatest opportunity of all times. You know, I mean, he sees it that way. There's some of us that see it that way. We see a lot of opportunity with the funding. There's a lot of funding there. You know, but in Indian country, you know, it's kind of hard to identify what's a good opportunity, you know, when it comes to the government. And so I think that's where there needs to be some, tribes that come together and, you know, iron sharpens iron and identify, you know, what's right, what's just being, you know, we don't know who some of these people are, fly-by-nights, you know, and they see all this money. They think there's a big opportunity. They think that, oh, I know an Indian buddy and I'm gonna go do something, you know, and throw enough mud on the wall, something might stick. It's their attitude, you know, and, you know, but, you know, here in Indian country, we have mouths to feed. You know, folks, you know, have no opportunity, you know, vehicles. And right now it's, you know, 2 above here at home and it's cold out. You know, it just snowed last night. You know, the elders don't have folks to, you know, haul wood if they got wood stoves. And, you know, there's a lot of that, you know, that they have enough to worry about, let alone trying to figure out what's going on in their world around them. And so I think what needs to be done from folks like ourselves is that we need to take that into consideration that, you know, we speak in acronyms, but a lot of people don't know what those acronyms are. I think Clifton's nodding his head because back home, you know, my wife would get after me because I started speaking in acronyms, you know, and she said, we don't know what any of that means, you know, and I had to sit back, think about it. And, you know, okay, yeah. And I started explaining it. And, you know, and that's what needs to be done in Indian country. You know, we have these great opportunities. Why is it a great opportunity? Who says it's a great opportunity? You know, and why do I need to believe that it's a great opportunity? Just because someone said it is? No, we need to find out. And that's where we need to start going to academia. We need to give the Indian folks and the Native nations, you know, some ownership. And that's where we are with these webinars. And I appreciate everything you guys are talking about. You know, Clifton, you guys are doing some good things. Jeremy, I know you guys are, you know, crossing over that imaginary line they call the border. And, you know, we're over here, you know, trying to do the same thing. And you have your problems over there in Canada, and we have our problems over here in America. I think together, you know, through these webinars, I think we can forge forward and figure something out, you know, identify what these great opportunities are about and who's it going to benefit. You know, I mean, yeah, it might be a great opportunity, but who's it really going to benefit? You know, I got transmission lines crossing my reservation. I don't even have, you know, enough wire to hang some clothes on. You know, they don't give me access, you know, and that's what it is in Indian country. We don't have access. Once we determine access, we realize control, and that's where we need to be. And so with that being said, I appreciate, you know, you guys coming on board. I know we had another speaker, Carlisle Begay was going to come on, but apparently his link didn't work either. So he had to step into another meeting. So we might see him on another webinar down the road. So I appreciate that. I'll hand it back over to Daniel. And if you guys have any comments on that, feel free to, you know, throw it back.
Thanks, CJ. I think that we're coming to the end, but I'd like to make at least one more comment in regards to what CJ said. And I agree. I think that's the whole purpose of these webinars is to have this discourse, to continue the conversation, to at least start the conversation and get the ball rolling and move forward and find some solutions for Indian country. We have to create the solutions, but also if we are not at the table, we're not, like I said, we're part of the meal. We are the meal. And so this is something that I come in contact with every day, even with tribes, peoples, communities that don't want to interact. or they're against certain things. It's that the point with the green energy transition and our move to decarbonize, it's going to happen whether we like it or not, and we need to participate. Otherwise, the federal government and the state governments are going to do things that impinge our sovereignty, but in certain ways, you know, the conversation about what's more important, our sovereignty or the environment, is gonna come to the forefront, and a lot of folks in our nation, in our world, are gonna say that the environment is more important than one specific or specific peoples. And so to get away from that, I think tribes and tribal communities need to participate in forums like this and get educated, and we need to help them. We have this opportunity, we have this forum to help educate and have a conversation with them. But I just wanted to make one last comment about one of the things that Jeremy mentioned in regards to primacy of class 6 wells. Now, obviously, like you said, we're talking acronyms. We're talking about, if you don't know what class 6 wells are, you know, they're the wells that will allow us to sequester CO2. Right now, the EPA has the federal government obviously has primacy, but certain states, North Dakota and Wyoming, are the 2 states that have primacy. That means that they have the ability to regulate those wells themselves. But that's expensive. It costs money. But at the same time, nobody's talking about tribal primacy. Tribes, through the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, have the ability to regulate resources on and off the reservation. On the reservation, but air, because air doesn't understand boundaries. So the air doesn't understand the reservation boundaries or state or national boundaries. So there are some off-reservation components of that. But basically, you know, we need to start talking about tribal primacy. But again, there's an expense there. Who pays? If tribes cannot afford it, then basically they can't take on that primacy of handling that part of a governmental function. But I also wanted to also comment on what Jeremy had mentioned at the beginning of his presentation around you know, it's true at Kemmer, there's an opportunity to replace coal with the technologies that are his project is dealing with, as well as down the road the Hydropower and nuclear. But there's a little bit of a catch there, is that even though Hydropower and some other folks, the state, talk about the fact that coal is going away, there's some state law that say, you know, hey, wait a minute, you know. So and with the Naughton power plant in Kemmer, just as an example, it's not necessarily 100% that plant's going to close down. The under state law, the utility has to offer it for sale first before, and if there's no buyers, then they can close it down. But so that hasn't happened yet, and so there's that's really important. And so I think that but no matter what, I think there's a solution for being able to capture the carbon, capture the CO2 from Naughton, sequester it, put it into a pipeline, send it off for enhanced oil recovery or sequestration other places. Right next door to Hydropower, which is a lot better, small modular nuclear reactor in a higher technology, which uses natrium. So I think that's a great opportunity, but it's not like I said, it's a win-win-win for Wyoming if we and Indian country as well, because there are some power plants that are on reservation, close to reservations, that are having the same conversations around closing. But I think we don't necessarily have to close them down. Let's keep them open. Let's capture the carbon. Let's keep the jobs. Let's increase more jobs with the natrium technology, and increase the taxable base, where the locals, the tribes, and the state and the feds win. And so I just wanted to say that before we close out. There's, like I said, a lot of food for thought on this conversation. It's unfortunate that Mr. Begay couldn't make it. But anyways, like I said, it was great having you, Jeremy, having you, Clifton, on. Again, thanks to the team, Michelle and Mike at USDA, and to the viewers out there and those that will watch once it's archived. We'll be sending the link later today or tomorrow with the recorded video that we're watching now. I guess there's a question. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Michelle.
I have a question here. Is anyone doing anything with renewable energy credits, especially communities that have power purchase agreements?
I personally, I don't know if any of the tribes are doing this. There are some projects in Nevada and Arizona, California, Southern California, where there are some tribes involved with solar primarily. And so I personally don't know if they're using RECs, but it's something that we could find out. We've always offered this on our first webinar, and this one is that if we have questions that we can't answer, we will find an answer and then get it back to our audience. So it's a good question. If anybody else may have an answer, you guys can go ahead and answer. But as far as I know, I don't have that answer.
I'd like to throw my bag into the hat, so to say. So what the equivalent in Canada, I believe, is the carbon credit initiative that is coming upstream. And what we're doing now is to prepare ourselves for that initiative, making sure that we're counting all the carbon credits that are available to us currently. That means an assessment of your forestry, your grasslands, your bushlands. And right now, I actually have a number for Frog Lake First Nations for entry into the market in 2 zones. Now, utilizing that carbon credit initiative, we can actually launch some of our dirtier initiatives, like going into our reservoirs and utilizing gas to create hydrogen could cause emissions. That's where we can use those offtakes and some of the other initiatives too, to make sure that we can function while using our legacy energy to reach the alternative power section that we want to get to. So I'm not sure if it's the same thing. Jeremy, you might want to jump in on me here. I might be mixing apples and oranges, but I believe something like that is the way we go.
No, I think, I think it's mixing. You're right. I think it's a good comment. But here in the U.S., we give out a couple of schemes that are specific carbon credits, and then the renewable energy credits around power generation. They're 2 different things. And so, like I said, there are some tribes that are doing have done some forestry carbon credit projects, because California has a program. That's mostly California's program can also go into, I believe it also goes into Canada and into Alaska. It's not just in the US, I believe. I could be wrong. Mike might know. He's an expert at that. But there are several tribes, one on the East Coast and some in California, that have already done forest projects where they do have gotten carbon credits to be able to sell into the market for the next 50 to 100 years. So that is happening. But the renewable energy credits, those are specific to power generation.
Understood. Thank you for.
No problem. And then it says here, Mickey has a question around the infrastructure law, where funds were designed to pay for states to gain primacy. He wonders whether or not that would apply for tribal primacy as well. It's something to look into. Usually, if it's not specific to tribes, then it won't include tribes. So in the law, I'm not an expert on the infrastructure bill as a, but we can take a look at it to see. But that's a good question, because that's usually one of the big issues with Indian country is the fact that a lot of these mandates are unfunded, and a lot of the things that could help us, we don't have the resources. We don't have the tax base to be able to charge those out to be able to get primacy. But we'll take a look at that. Like I said, these are a lot of good questions, and what we plan to do is we're going to research them and answer them offline, and then we'll send an email out to the audience, hopefully within a week or so with those answers.
There might be some, in Wind River, and there's probably other cases where that, like MHA, where you have several tribes that are cohabitating one reservation. And it could, I wonder if, so if there is an opportunity for tribes to apply for primacy, whether maybe I can understand one of the pushbacks would be the capacity to be able to actually do that with some tribes. So it may be a case where this is another opportunity where tribes can come together as a larger group with greater capacity to do something like this, where it might be an easier sell to have an application for primacy where not just maybe on Wind River where you have two tribes, but maybe tribes in the Rockies area or others could come together and demonstrate capacity to be their own permitting agent, to have their own permitting agency and not rely on the state in the case of Wyoming or the federal government in the case of California.
No,
Jeremy,
you're
on
right.
that-
That's, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say on that case of primacy, that would be something that you already have a pre-existing environmental authority in place and structured to be able to do that. So you'd already be doing your UIC work under the auspices that you have the right as the tribe to do your own environmental work within the guidelines of what the EPA would require you to do. To ask for the primacy for class 6, you're going to require all that other infrastructure in place before you can go just get a class 6 infrastructure sign off. So it's I think Navajo got a certain amount of primacy on their environmental regulations on reservation, and that might be the first test of that. They wanted to go forward and try to get their primacy. It's very challenging. Texas, Louisiana are in that mix, and they haven't received it yet. So
Yeah, it is challenging. Thanks, Mike. It is an issue. Again, it goes back to money and capacity. I mean, these are very expensive. Like I said, if states can't do it, then most tribes probably won't be able to do it. But the comment does bring up like I said, a good comment around consortium building, because that's something that, although we have in the U.S., there are tribes that have consortium for various things. On this, that it doesn't happen because most tribes see their reservations as their own. So I mean, it's their own kind of kingdom, their own area where they have sovereignty, and they don't really like to share that with the states or the feds, let alone another tribe. But if it can be a consortium around technical assistance and regulatory consortium, I could see that happening. Mike's right. Tribes have various levels of a regulatory authority already, not just on the wells, but on air emissions and water emissions and various things through EPA. Various tribes have various levels of regulatory authority. They have to get permission first, but I don't know of any tribes yet that have applied for this class 6 wells for CO2 particularly. But again, I think it goes back to having the capacity and having the infrastructure in your tribe to be able to regulate that. It's very expensive, and just having the industry there to support that, because most likely tribes won't pay, they'll pass it on to their industry, which then makes tribal projects even that much more expensive. And so probably for this, it'll be easier for the feds to keep the primacy on behalf of the tribes. Probably would be the way to go. But it does, like I said, it does bring up interesting food for thought around this idea of forming consortiums to do specific things, just like they do in Canada, which is a lot more beneficial than what's done here. So
you might find Daniel, CJ, and Jeremy and Clifton, and well, I can't speak to Canada, but the sovereignty of the nations and them willing to take on a certain amount of the process of long-term geologic storage could have a certain financial benefit to both the tribe and to the user of that particular geographic area. So my guess is there's probably something worth exploring from a tribe by tribe geographical basis on how that could play out.
That's interesting. Yeah, sovereign immunity and other there are advantages that a sovereign nation can have. But also just keep in mind with the topic of what we're here for is how can the DOE, how can the federal government
Sure.
facilitate? And here's a case where if tribes feel that they, for example, in California, if you have tribes that are in good areas and they want to work together, maybe they're too small, that they don't have the geology separately, and they don't have the capacity separately. But if they could work together, they feel they should have the right to do that. Maybe this is where the DOE or the federal government can help them build that capacity.
Sure. You have a couple of, I know we're over now all of a sudden, I'm gonna shut up. But you have the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, Southern States Energy Board, the Great Lakes Compact Commission, where these are quasi-government entities set up to do exactly that, where there's broad geographic areas and interests that are somewhat aligned, and it's the best as to do as a one rather than all this piecemeal work. And so why not for the tribes, the same kind of quasi-government agency, a tribal government agency that could then do what they're talking about doing. I'm gonna stop there for me. You guys, it's an honor to work with you guys, with Daniel and CJ on this work, and we're really happy to be able to host this program with you all. And there's a lot more going on, and I really encourage folks to stay tuned for the next series of these webinars that the gentlemen put together. And Clifton, good to meet you for the first time, and Jeremy, good to meet you as well. Michelle, I'm going to turn back over to you and Daniel.
Well, it's good. Thanks, Mike, for that comment. You make a lot of good points, and this last thing that we'll leave us with is which I didn't think about when you talked about. I was just looking at the primacy of Class 6 just as a cost, but the reality is, if groups are going to be sequestering and the geology lies under the reservation, that's a revenue stream that potentially in the tens of billions of dollars. So the multi-million-dollar cost of a CO2 well or regulating it is peanuts compared to what tribes could gain from that. So you're right. So I think it does make sense to look into tribes to do that individually or as a consortium. So that's something that we'll take note of, and then that will hopefully we'll be able to discuss in the future. Like I said, thanks a lot, everybody, our whole team here. Look out for our next webinar, which will be in January. And we'll hopefully like I said, we'll be passing the link around to this recording once it's up, and for you guys to be able to watch again or share with your friends. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. You went over everything that I was going to say. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks for the invite.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
You all. So long.
Thanks, Clifton.
Bye-bye.